Big Questions with the Dead Milkmen.
This week's question comes from Billy Johnson of Oklahoma City, and it's just the F word over and over again. I'm sorry, I'm a silly goose tonight. This week's question is, what's something that books, TV, movies, etc. always get wrong about being in a band or about the music industry in general? And I've got a list of about 100 of these, but I'm only going to talk about one, and this one has always bothered me. It's one rehearsal, and then the next shot, they're playing in front of a packed club. It'd be a packed stadium, too. It's a huge crowd. One rehearsal's like, hey, Skippy, that riff is pretty good. And then the next thing you know, there's like at least 500 people in the audience. It's always bothered me. This has only ever happened to one band ever once, and I think that's the Strokes, because the one guy's dad owned a modeling company, and people would go where the models were. But this is the only time ever. It's always bothered me. I see it in movies, like in Anne Rice's, like the second vampire book or whatever, or movie. There's like, the vampires are more believable than this. It doesn't happen. They never show the process of, like, having 1,000 practices and then getting crappy little gigs and build your way up. So this is like pet peeves part 2. It's something that's always bothered me. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest. I now turn things over to Joe.
Wow, that was fast.
I think yes. I don't have time for social pleasantries.
Okay. Well, I was going to say overnight success. It's almost the same thing as you said, so I won't say that instead. There's one thing that they almost never tell you about, is how hits are made. So this is something that I think we know. I don't know if Dan knows it. When you don't know how hits are made.
I don't know. You heard you've seen the songs I turn
well,
in. No.
It's also the reason that it takes that song. There's always a delay between when a song is recorded and when it's actually released.
Why don't you tell us what that is? I think I know what it's going to be.
Because it's either the record producer and or a executive from the record company gets. They have to have this satanic ritual involving involving master tapes.
Yes.
Now it might be a USB drive these days, but this has been going on at least in rock music, and now it's spread out to all kinds of genres. And they sacrifice either a goat or a small child or a mammal of some sort, depending on the genre, and then that will cause the song to be a hit. You can't have a hit song without that happening. At least not in our kind of music.
Now, for those of you wondering what the hell Joe is talking about, which is also the subtitle of my biography, Joe is talking about, there's a Jack Chick pamphlet. Seek it out. If we can find a link, we'll put it in the description. But it's all about the rock industry, and the cover of it used to be, I hear they changed it, it was Stonehenge made up of 8-track tapes.
Was that a Jack Chick? Jack Chick?
About the Satanist Druid beat. Yeah, it was. What was it, Joe? Do you remember the name of it?
No, I was hoping you would have a copy of it. For some reason in my mind, it was like a full-fledged comic book.
Yeah, it was. It wasn't just a pamphlet. It was a full comic book that you would get, and it explained the rock and roll industry. And they would take, as Joe pointed out, the master tape, which was a cassette. It wasn't on a reel-to-reel, and they would put it on an altar, and then they would have to play around it for 8 months. And when Joe first saw that, he's like, "Oh, that's why it takes so long to get around."
That's probably why. So I never seen that in any movies or anything about the music.
It would be better though if I saw that in the movie.
All right, whatever.
Go to Dan now.
Yeah, edit that part out.
I've always had a problem with stuff like just because I have this weird attention to detail with certain things for some reason, like I guess it was Wawa was doing it was like their Hoagie Fest thing. Ooh. And they had like a band in
the
like
Wawa Beatles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a psychedelic looking, like cartoonish thing. And like the drummer's got like a kick drum and a snare drum and a cymbal. And it was two guitar players, but they both had 4 little tuning pegs. So it was 2 bass players and no cables coming out of the instruments and no amplifiers.
It's all wireless.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Right, yeah. 2 bass players and a drummer band, all wireless. It's a hoagie fest.
Goes into your mind.
Yeah, they're called the Wah. They're actually called the Wah Wah Beatles. Right? That's what everybody calls them. I thought you were going to go with this one, which if you watch the first couple seasons of the Partridge Family, this one, I'm playing bass. And the guy's strumming on the bass.
Oh yeah, there are tons of stuff. I was just getting at that because that was the first example that popped into my mind. That when people, and your question in general, Rodney, got me thinking that so typically in media, I feel like these people are not consulting actual bands when they're doing something like, or anybody who knows anything about anything technical. And I'm not even like a technical person. It's just if I were to make like a show or a movie and like have something in it that I didn't know anything about, I'd probably look into it.
Maybe they're consulting the Strokes. Maybe that's it. Maybe the Strokes like, well, we had a rehearsal. It was a big show. I don't know.
Well, every episode of the Partridge Family pretty much violates the technical rules of how
Everything.
music gets.
Laws of physics, everything. It
And
violates.
so often, people who are clearly right-handed, they pick up a
Yes.
guitar and they're,
But you don't have time for that in a commercial or a 30-minute production.
But I really see it very often when somebody is trying to pass off a guitar and there are not 6 strings on the drawing or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like
It's hard. I've tried to draw guitars. It's just too hard to draw all those strings.
too hard to draw. Well, then you know what? Why are you?
I don't take the. I don't have the patience.
You don't have the time for it. Why are you even trying?
Yeah. I remember when that German guy told you do not draw guitars very well. Got a call back, got it in.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. Dan, you got any more to unload on, or?
I
Let
don't
it out.
know. I guess like what you were saying too, like it does seem like in most things it's just like this really quick road to success. And then suddenly they're on drugs.
Yeah, suddenly they're on. It's always the drugs come after the success. I guess they have the money for the drugs by then.
Yeah, I was on drugs way before punk rock.
Yeah, I think a lot of bands start with drugs and then they get successful and then
They can
They blame the
afford
drugs.
more expensive drugs.
Yeah, like the Partridge Family.
Yeah.
They replaced a member of the family and nobody noticed. They replaced the dark-haired kid with a blonde-haired kid, and they were so high.
I noticed. I was very upset about that, but they don't explain it.
You're still upset about that.
I stopped buying Partridge Family records because the drummer wasn't the same.
Oh dear God. Dean, do you want in on this, or you just
Sure. I mean, I kind of pick up where Dan left off. I mean, I was going to say time. Surely books, music, or books, movies, and TV shows, have to compress time anyway to tell the story. But I mean, you never see the boring 8-hour van rides or the 3 hours sitting in the airport lounge waiting to catch a flight, or you never see the 5 hours waiting for sound check after load in because you're the opening band and the headliner wants to jam for 3 hours before you get to sound check. The compression of time, not only from rehearsing once and playing your first show to like 1,000 people, it is also multiplied by all the time you spend waiting around for a lot of stuff. It's the rock star life is a lot of waiting around for stuff to happen. So, and I guess the nature of the medium of film, TV, and books, you have to kind of gloss over that. But at the same time, that gives a false sense of overnight success to a lot of people who think like, hey, I wrote 3 songs, I can be a rock star now. It's like, no. So
Yeah. Also, like the record process, like
yeah.
you have a song and all of a sudden next week it's on the radio and there's like 45s out of it. You know?
Well, yeah, and that ties in with the other thing I was going to mention, which is, I mean, within the last 5 years or thereabouts, I mean, you know, we're thinking about maybe a lot of films and TV shows and books and things that have been written, you know, in the past 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. That music scene does not exist anymore.
I know, now it's like, hey, we put our album on Bandcamp.
Exactly. It's like bands have to do a lot of work themselves now. They have to develop their own following. They have to manage their own social media now. This is all before they even get considered to be. I mean, do they even want to be signed by a label now? I mean, you stand a better chance of doing your own thing and making your way in the music industry if you do it yourself now. I mean, that world does not exist anymore. So, you know, it's just kind of a weird thing now. I mean, are there, I challenge people, are there new TV shows? Are there new movies that kind of represent the new modern way of the music business? I don't know if there are now.
I'm afraid they'll get it wrong. And like Bandcamp will be like backstage in 60s films. You know what I mean? We put it on Bandcamp and there's a whole bunch of naked people dancing around.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just kind of a weird scene now. But
well,
yeah,
I was actually curious.
The time compression thing.
With the question, I was thinking about it and I thought you guys have another perspective that I don't have. Like you were at least somewhat briefly on a major label for a couple of years. So when you see stuff in movies and books, like when they talk about like label support and stuff, like did you guys have that?
You mean Hollywood Records? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, did you guys get like advances and support and stuff? And like, did they? Yeah,
they hire publicity agents to like. One thing I was going to say is you don't hear in any books or TV about the huge PR industry that I think still, I mean, it's maybe huger than it ever was. And the fact is, there are mainstream publications, music, where people get music information from. I mean, they're online now, not print like it used to be, that will not write anything about anybody unless they have a PR agent, which is expensive. So, I mean, we do have you have the DIY and the bloggy stuff and going viral on Facebook, but still, PR agents are involved behind the scenes for a lot of this stuff, and they're not mentioned in these books. Maybe in the how-to books, I don't know, because I don't read them.
If I had an advertising agency, I'd call it McMahon, Tate, LaBianca. Like McMahon and Tate from Bewitched, but with the LaBianca to make it friendly. Kind of. Yeah, Joe's absolutely right. Actually, Talking to Ghost podcast had a person on who does like PR for a lot of independent artists, which I thought was quite interesting. Because, you know, normally I know there are companies out there that just do the PR. And then anymore, speaking of PR, why it's so important, Joe, is a lot of people just copy and paste the PR stuff that they're getting.
Right, which is why music journalism is not a really respected occupation. I don't know if it ever was, but it's just like, no one does fact checking. They just, if Wikipedia says something, they're probably going to repeat it, not realizing that they probably got it from some publication where a PR agent just made something up because that's how someone could get attention for them or got someone to agree to some kind of stunt. And it wasn't something that really happened, I don't know, or would have really happened.
I miss the old days when you could just get pressed by running naked to a hotel lobby. I mean, like
sure, you could probably do that. I mean,
famous. What?
You could also get arrested and thrown in jail.
Woohoo! Yeah, hang dong. Okay, yeah, it's almost like small bands have to go and tell people about other small bands, which might bring us to recommendations. I don't know.
Yeah, recommendations.
Okay, before recommendations, RIP. to Grant Imahara, who was on Mythbusters, did some work for Robot Wars, and just a really, everybody says a really sweet guy. I never met him, met people who knew him. Just all around nice guy who passed away. So yeah, Grant, R.I.P. All right, so this first, I'm going to kind of cheat and combine two bands. So, but this way they'll be locked in your head together. It's Lana Del Rabies. That's Lana Del Rabies and Olivia Neutron-John. Got it? Lana Del Rabies, Olivia Neutron-John, both great artists. You'll really enjoy what they do. But this way, when you think of one, you'll think of the other, and you'll go check out two artists. So I saved you some time there, linking the hemispheres of your brain. Now I want to recommend a person, and that person is John Waters. John Waters is still out there being very funny, being very interesting, just doing all sorts of horribly wonderful things. And if you've never, Joe has this thing where he likes to have people write letters. So I encourage everybody. I'm going to give you, and we'll put it up on. You'll see it somewhere. We'll graffiti it on the side of the Washington Monument or something. Here's how you can send a thank you letter. I'd like everybody to create a thank you card. It can be in bad taste. It's John Waters. Thank you card or something, and send it to John Waters. You can send it to him at John Waters, care of Atomic Books, and that is 3620 Falls, that's Falls Road, Baltimore, Maryland, and that's 21211. And we'll put that somewhere else. But yeah, I think it'd be nice if everybody just sent John Waters a card that said thank you. There's a book of his called, I think it's Sicko was the one, where he got a letter from this kid named Freddie. And Freddie said, hey, I like to do stuff, I've heard about you. I like to do stuff like you do. I do sick stuff. But instead of like you being famous, I get in trouble. And John Waters said, don't just make it sick and funny. And Freddie turned out to be Fred Armistead, for real. I'm not making it up. From Documentary Now, Saturday Night Live, yeah, all that stuff. So yeah, just shoot John Waters. There would be no Dead Milkmen without John Waters. There'd be no punk rock without John Waters. Please, this week, just make a little thank you card and shoot it off to John Waters. And send us a picture. Maybe we'll show it next week. So, all right, thank you.
I'd like to recommend a book which I read. I generally recommend reading books, but this one fascinated me. It might sound boring. It's called The Great A&P and the Struggle for a Small Business in America by Marc Levinson, who's an journalist, economics expert, business writer.
It's about the A&P markets?
Yeah.
This was a supermarket. For the first half of the 20th century, they were the largest retailer in the United States, believe it or not. They started out in the Civil War era as a tea seller, as a tea shop, believe it, that had remarkable success in national mail order. And I thought that was pretty interesting to read the story of how a tea shop became one of the world's largest retailers. And then in the 50s, they started to decline, and that's in here too. But largely, it's a story there's all kinds of interesting and ancillary stories that are in here. It's chock full of interesting tidbits, like you get to see how green stamps came about in premium and the whole, reward system. But they were not the first supermarket, but they were the first retail grocer and the first chain retail grocer, not the first chain grocer and the first chain supermarket, and they totally changed the way people buy food.
And
we're still being influenced by their success today. And a lot of the story is also about how the government tried to about the economics of politics, and how, especially in the 30s Depression era, how regulations were aimed particularly at A&P to prop up the mom and pop stores, but didn't quite work. But I thought it was a fascinating read. Thank you.
I was just saying A&P actually stands for apples and pears, because that's all they had originally.
No, they originally only had tea.
You want something else?
The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. But
Yeah.
that's funny that you say it.
Books about food, the politics of food, are fascinating. There's a I can't remember the name of it. Oh God, it's going to kill me. There's a really interesting book about like how like lobster went from being the food of the poor.
Yeah.
About steak. A book about steak. And I think like the meat of the land or Red Meat Nation. I think it is. And yeah, I will read anything about food. So I want to borrow that book from you.
All right.
Dan, you have a recommendation?
I have a specific recommendation. It's for this Saturday at the Art Museum. And so this Saturday, if this is being posted on Saturday, would be today, if you're watching this, from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. It's a paint and sip hosted by Ace's Paint Parties, which is part of, there's also the Young Ladies of Philly are involved in this, but Ace's Paint Parties is cool. Like, it's a lady that runs a business and she brings paint party and you can do painting. And so that's at the Art Museum. Bring a blanket from 1 to 3 on Saturday.
It has to be outside, right? Because I don't think the museum itself is open.
Yeah, it's outside.
And this is at any art museum, not just Philadelphia. Show up at any of them. Tell them Dan sent you.
And Franklin Parkway.
My recommendation this week is for a podcast called The Omnibus. And The Omnibus is co-hosted by John Roderick and Ken Jennings. Ken Jennings, you might recognize the name from Jeopardy, one of the all-time high-scoring Jeopardy players. And the two of them, they publish a podcast. It's twice a week, so you can get plenty of podcasts. They've been at it for a while. And they pick a subject that they trade off interests. They pick weird subjects and they do an investigation and they explain all about it. So the three shows that I recently can mention to you, they did one about hanky codes. You know about hanky codes? They also, have you ever heard of Fletcherizing, which was the fad or the philosophy that you should chew your food like 40 times per bite or something? I forget what the number was. And also circling back to something we talked about earlier, they had a whole show which was fascinating about Chick Tracts. They explained the guy behind Chick Tracts, how they got started, how they were drawn, everything. It's really, really cool. So they have hundreds of shows. I highly recommend it. And the two of them are great co-hosts because they trade off on each other's jokes. And so it's called The Omnibus. I highly recommend it.
Or how long are they?
What's that?
Is it a half hour or how long is it?
It depends. It's totally variable. It could be like anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. It's like dependent on the subject, I guess.
That's cool.
God never gave Jack Chick the ability to draw anatomy or perspective. you think if there was a God and he was on Jack's side, he would have said, yay!
Well, if you can go to the Jack Chip website and you can like order like one of every Jack Chip tracks or whatever. They're you can order them and they show up in a big pack.
Yes, I once sent them $5 in nickels. Remember when we got
yeah.
I'm a
So anyway, that's my recommendation for the week.
all right.
Thanks for joining us.
Eddie's sensual adult talk for anybody who's just tuned in.